Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another analysis slash guide. Today we're taking a look at Yukong because the 1.1 special program English version has, I think, officially completed, or it's out now. It was about 20 or so minutes ago, so it's out now, and we've got the Yukong information. It's kind of been a thing for a while, but now that it's officially kind of known that she's a character, let's talk about her and what she does. So in this video, we're going to go through her whole kit, standard, and then also Eidolons, Tracer's passives. I'm going to talk about gearing her, light cones, the relic stuff, and then also the team composition, and then generally how you're going to play her and maybe some things that you're going to have to keep in mind when going into her. So let's start off by looking at the generic kit. So all values for her skill and all that stuff is going to be assumed level 10 because of the values. Not going to be looking at level 1s or, with Eidolons, this is just level 10s, so if you've gotten the character standard 80 maxed out. So going into it, her basic attack is just generic, don't worry about the basic attack, but going on to the skill, you use it and you obtain 2 stacks of Roaring Bowstrings to a maximum of 2 stacks. When Roaring Bowstrings is active, the attack of all allies is increased by 75%, and 1 stack of Roaring Bowstring is removed after every turn by an ally, except for the turn which Yukong gains the Roaring Bowstrings on by unleashing the skill. So essentially, use the skill, you gain 2 stacks, and then the next 2 characters acting will have 75% increased attack. It is for all allies, but it's essentially for the next 2 actions, which is quite good. That's 75% at max level, incredibly large attack bonus. I believe the largest attack bonus currently in the game. I could be wrong on that. Do correct me again if that is wrong. I think it's bigger than what Tingyun and Bronya can provide, but again, that could be slightly wrong. But regardless, that is an incredibly powerful skill, already decent enough value to just go by herself, but her ultimate makes it even better. So, when using her ultimate, if Roaring Bowstrings is active on Yukong, which you get from her skill, all allies' crit rate additionally increases by 27%, and crit damage increases by 62%. At the same time, you deal an additional amount of imaginary damage of Yukong's attack to a single enemy. Incredible. Incredibly powerful. You combo this with the skill, incredibly powerful. Rather, you have to combo the ultimate with the skill, which is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So, essentially, if you combine the 2 kits or the 2 skills, you get 75% attack bonus for 2 allies, as well as 27% crit rate increase and 62 crit damage, making your character incredibly powerful. The crit rate is probably the strongest part about it. Bronya does do crit damage boosting, so that's not a foreign thing, but no characters really do crit rate boosting, and Yukong, being the first new 4-star coming out, giving a crit rate bonus is absolutely ridiculously powerful. And right now, very, very strong support. Probably going to replace Asta, or, maybe get close to replacing Tingyun if Yukong ends up, getting a signature light cone, which I'll get into in the light cone section. But right now, standard kit, very, very powerful. Going into the passive is mostly negligible. Basic attack deals 75% of attack of imaginary damage, and break effect increases by 100%. This can be triggered once every 2 turns. Pretty much forgettable. It's just an extra little bonus every 2 turns. You can forget about it, essentially. Trace 1. After attacking an enemy and entering battle, the enemy's corresponding type toughness will be weakened, which is quite good. But you have to attack the enemy and then enter combat. The type weakness will be weakened. It's fine. It's nothing too spectacular. And then Trace 2, after the technique is used, enter sprint mode for 20 seconds. While in sprint mode, movement speed increases by 35%, and Yukong receives 2 stacks of bowstrings when she enters battle by attacking. Now, this did say Trace 2 on where I got the information from. This might also just be the technique in general. But just bear in mind as well that this is also all a lot of pre-release information, so this all could be subject to shift, but essentially, after you use her technique, you just get 2 Roaring Bowstring stacks as soon as you enter combat, which is spectacular. You get that 75% attack boost straight away, and the more the merrier, am I right or am I right? And by the way, there's always a little bit of a small summary here on the screen. Skill and ultimate are great. Skill is, requires turn order management, and the ultimate is a mega buff. If you want to read the summary, by all means go for it, but that is pretty much it. Her base kit is extremely powerful, mainly due to the skill and ultimate giving incredibly large damage boosting potential. As for her traces, they're minute bonuses. That's pretty much all it is. It's nothing too crazy, but if you can manage the whole techniques and then using the stacks correctly and knowing which character goes first, then you can kind of get a double down of the 75% attack bonus there. But for now, the skill and the ultimate are carrying this character to the heavens. But moving on to her Eidolons, again, all subject to change, but going to Eidolon 1, increase the allies' speed by 10% at the beginning of the battle for the next 2 turns. It's great, it's just a generic 10% speed increase, you can't really go wrong with that. It's great for Sealy, it's great for speed characters, it's great for attack, it's just great in general. You go faster and you get bigger wins. E2, when an ally's current energy reaches its limit, she regenerates 5 energy. So when an ally, any other character other than Yukong, hits max energy, getting their ultimate available to use, Yukong regenerates 5, which can create a nice cycle if all your characters regenerate energy kind of like on their turn, and then Yukong goes last, and she gets her thing and uses her thing, and so it can be a nice cycle. Presumably, E3 is going to be her skill +2, and probably talent +1, so again, subject to change, but that's presumably what it is. E4, Yukong deals 30% more damage when she has Roaring Bowstrings active. Essentially, that first initial hit after she uses her skill, if you do want to combo her ultimate after her skill, or if you do happen to just have her alive after Bowstrings is used, she deals 30% more damage. It's not going to be overly effective for her, but it's just essentially making her ultimate a bit more damaging. E5 is again presumably ultimate +2 and probably skill +1 or talent +1, which is great. And then E6 is going to be the biggest game changer and probably the biggest one that you're going to want to get if you are investing into Yukong. Casting your ultimate provides a single stack of Roaring Bowstrings. Now, I'll probably elaborate a bit more on this once we get to the end where I talk about things to keep in mind, but this lets you essentially cover 3 characters with your Roaring Bowstrings buff, as you can use her skill, have the next 2 characters use the buffs, and then on the 3rd character's turn, you use her ultimate to then get that 3rd stack of Roaring Bowstrings, which can then provide full coverage of that 75% attack bonus, which is a very, very powerful thing, especially if, let's say, your team has a very bad speed management kind of setup, where your DPS is very slow and they're going last and they're not able to actually get the first 2 turns coverage. Her ultimate being able to provide 1 stack of Roaring Bowstrings is actually very good, and also makes it easier to overlap the ultimate and skill, because if we remember, the ultimate here requires Roaring Bowstrings to be active. So if you don't have Roaring Bowstrings active when you use her ultimate, then you're not actually going to get that bonus. So being able to just have that naturally through E6 is extremely powerful. So E6 is the strongest, but E1, E2 are absolutely fine. E4 is practically useless, and E3 and 5, as usual, are, the generic boost. So if you can get to E6, that's going to be her prime power, but E1 and 2 are just fine in my opinion. E3, though, is going to make a massive difference, as it is a skill level up, presumably. Moving on, though, light cones. This one is quite simple, quite straightforward. Bronya's is currently the only, 5-star light cone, but it's not the one that I'm going to recommend. For those who don't know what it does, is essentially ultimate has a chance to refund a skill point. This can be triggered every so often. Energy recharge, or energy regeneration rate rather, is increased. And then also, after the wearer uses a skill, the next ally taking action deals increased damage. The same can be said for the past and future. That is roughly the same effect, just without the refunding of the skill point. And the reason I don't want to recommend this one is because the DPS has to be the next one in the turn order, right? It has to be your Yukong and then your main DPS. Now, the chances of that happening, unless you have a perfectly managed team, the chances of that happening are very, very low, unless you obviously made the perfect team in terms of speed. And so recommending those 2, it depends on your team. If you want a bit more of a universal buff, Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds is going to be your better one. You have a 2 in 3 chance of getting a DPS boost buff, essentially, at the start of every Yukong turn, and you have a 1 in 3 of getting energy regeneration rate. This one is a little bit more universal, as you'll just get the buff, right? It's not any kind of like a finicky thing. The buff is lower. Technically, crit damage isn't a lower buff, but technically we'll just assume that it is lower because the other ones are a raw damage increase by a larger percent. Now, Planetary Rendezvous here, Asta's signature, is here purely under the idea that in the future we get an imaginary main DPS, and you would want to use Planetary Rendezvous on her, as you can get a massive damage dealt increase just by having this equipped on her for the same elemental type characters. But that's all a very situational thing. The one that I'm recommending is Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds, as it is very universal and provides buffs to all characters, much like Yukong does. But her best in slot, if you can get the perfect team for it, is going to be But the Battle Isn't Over, which is Bronya's signature. After that, Past and Future. But that is, again, very, very specific team composition and very, very specific turn order management. So take that how you will. I recommend Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds. Going on to her equipment, Wastelander of Banditry Desert is going to be her best in slot. It's imaginary damage increase and then, crit rate and crit damage increase as well. Nothing else really compares. Nothing else is really usable. You can try Thief of Shooting Meteor for the break effect, but I highly doubt you're going to want to delegate an extremely good buffer to be a break effect character. But you may also want to do that. It's really up to you, but these are the two that I recommend. Nothing else really helps her. As for your planetary ornaments, Space Sealing Station, Sprightly Von Wack, and Talia Kingdom of Banditry are all great ones. It's all dependent on what you want to achieve with the character. If you want more break effect, that you can go for that one. If you want more Sprightly Von Wack, which is energy regen, you can go for that. Or if you want Space Sealing Station, which is more damage, you can go for that. The one that I personally recommend will either be Talia Kingdom of Banditry or Space Sealing Station, depending on if I want to do more damage or if I want to do more support. Support is obviously break effect, breaking enemy weakness faster. Space Sealing Station is more damage, dealing bigger damage, because obviously Yukong's ultimate does deal a hefty amount of damage. 361% at level 10 is pretty good. But again, for whatever situation you want to build the character for, go for that. Sprightly Von Wack sorry, can't even speak English. Sprightly Von Wack is here just for that bit of utility, energy regen, but it's not an overly useful one because it's only 5%. So I recommend go for Space Sealing Station. Final answer. Let's go. Moving on though, this is the team composition section. So Yukong purely fits that support role. She's just a support. Now, don't take these teams as actual recommendations. These are not actual recommendation teams. These are just random things I put together that just showcase where she fits into the team. She's the pure support character. Now, you can run her with other co-supports. It's going to be a little bit more finicky. Running her with a Bronya, it's going to be a lot more finicky because you want the turn order to be Yukong, Bronya, and then your main DPS. So it's a little bit more tricky. But, generally speaking, Yukong is just the support. You don't want to run her as a main DPS. She doesn't deal enough damage and consistently. I don't think she can be a good sub DPS because, again, her main damage comes from her ultimate. And, again, ultimates are not, every turn. And she's not a healer or tank, so she's pure support. Run her for that. As for if you run her with a co-support or a co-sub DPS, that's really up to you and up to your choice if you want to risk that. It's a little bit more finicky. I recommend kind of running her with that main DPS, sub DPS, and then a support, and then a healer/tank at the end. Something like the top essentially example is the one that I would recommend running her in. But, I'll probably end up running her with the middle comp because the GOATs are in the club, right? Yukong, Jingyuan, and Bronya, the absolute GOATs of the game. They're going to be running the club and getting the big damage numbers in. But yeah, that's the essentially team composition that I'm going to recommend, is just she fills in the support column, but you can run her with a co-support if you just so choose. A bit more risky though. And things to keep in mind. This is an absolutely amazing slideshow. Thank you for tuning in. Things to keep in mind is the turn order management thing that I've been mentioning a few times. It's extremely important. DPS must go within 2 turns after Yukong uses her skill unless you have the E6, right? As I explained, her skill only lasts for 2 turns, essentially, 2 characters' turns after she uses it, right? Unless you have her E6. So it's very specific. If you have her E6, it's a lot, the whole situation is a lot more avoidable. If you have her E6, it's a lot more avoidable. You can essentially, as soon as it's your DPS's turn, use Yukong's E6, get the buff, and then be on your merry way. But that is E6 requirement. If you don't have an E6, you're going to have to strategize a lot with your speed, manage which character goes faster, which character goes slower. If you have a Bronya, do some funny management stuff. It's going to be a little bit more finicky, but if you do manage that stuff, and if you do get a lot of, decent builds out of it, it's going to be an incredibly strong team composition because the buffs are incredible. And then the other thing to keep in mind, which is really not a lot of things to keep in mind, only 2 dot points here, she doesn't have an exact best in slot light cone. She just has okay ones. There's nothing that's screaming best in slot for Yukong. There really isn't anything that's absolutely blowing my mind away for usage for her. Her signature one, the past and the future, I believe it's called, something along those lines. That is great and it has her as the main character of the picture, so presumably it is her best in slot. But it just doesn't feel like her best in slot. It feels very filler. It feels very not her. I hope that in the future there is a better one for her, but Carve the Moon, Weave the Clouds is currently what I'd classify as her best in slot. But yeah, she just does not have an exact best in slot that you can just label as incredibly powerful for her. She just has decent ones at best. And that's pretty much the end of the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you so much for hanging out. Really appreciate it. Yukong is an absolute powerhouse of a character. If you miss out on getting this character, which essentially if you don't play during 1.1, I believe Don't quote me on this one. I haven't actually watched the live stream. I believe she's being given out for free as a part of one of the events. By all means, if you're playing the game, get this character. Incredibly powerful unit. Level her up. You can get a lot of value out of her just out of using her generically. So do that by all means. If you miss out on this event, if you're playing in the future and you're watching this, try to get this character on a character's banner that you like. Obviously, I don't ever recommend rolling for 4 stars specifically. It's a little bit more risky, but if there's a 5-star that you like and she happens to be on the banner, by all means go for it. She's an incredible unit, and I expect a lot of big numbers to be coming out of the main DPSs with this lady in the party, as that crit rate and crit damage bonus is incredible. But that's that with this character. Hopefully this was insightful, hopefully this did help people understand how she works, and hopefully you guys end up getting her in your roles. Have a great day. Thank you so much for hanging out, really appreciate it. Like and subscribe, because that's fun, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.